Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah. Today I'm going to be talking about my predictions for the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. It has been a hot minute since I've made a video. I just go through these lulls of like not feeling super inspired, maybe not reading enough, or just, I don't know, doing other things, or maybe trying to read so much and then like not having time to make or edit a video. So yeah, it's been a while and my apologies for that. I always say I want to like get back to a regular schedule and I feel like that works for like a few weeks and then I just sort of fall off it again. I find it really hard to like manage my time around work and like other things that aren't always inherently like fun to do. Like I like making the videos, but then editing the video is not a fun thing for me to do. So it just prevents me from like filming sometimes. But I did want to come and make this video. It's actually kind of exciting because if I'm not mistaken, my first video ever was filmed around this time a year ago, and it was also a prediction for the Women's Prize shortlist. So I feel like I've come a little bit full circle. I don't know, maybe I'll make like a little reflection on my channel. I don't know that I have necessarily warned that, but yeah, it's exciting that I've been doing this for about a year, even if it has been a little bit, I don't know, iffy with the timing sometimes. But yeah, let's get into it. I have read, well, I'm on my 8th book for the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. And I feel like I've gotten to read the books pretty quickly and like easily. The library actually had a lot more of them available than I expected, and I just had to kind of wait until they were, well, available to me. However, I feel like I have not enjoyed the books as much this year. And they haven't been like awful or anything, I just haven't gone into a lot of them. I feel like a lot of them have been 3-star books for me and just not inherently super exciting ones. But I also can't pick apart too many things that I like disliked. It didn't work for me with a lot of them. There was maybe one, the 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster, and that was the only one that I feel like I can really point to and be like, this just didn't work for me for these reasons. Like I didn't like all the different perspectives when I expected like one perspective only, and this book is about like a woman who lives across a century in both like North and South Korea largely, and she has all these different lives. If you haven't read it, well, all these different lives. I mean, she's like a spy, she's a traitor, she's a mother, she's all these different things. And so each chapter supposedly focuses on that, but then you get like other perspectives from other people, and it's a little bit confusing. The timeline is also like told like, oh, first life, or sorry, it starts at like 5th life and then goes to like 3rd life and then like 2nd life, and it just kind of goes in a weird direction, which I personally didn't appreciate. And then there's a weird thing at the end. Anyway, that's the one book that I feel like this one really didn't work for me. But a lot of the other ones were just like, I just felt somewhat ambivalent about the writing, about the idea, the story, the characters. And yeah, I feel like usually I'm a lot more excited about the books that I'm reading for this prize. So last year when I made this video, I was able to come up with like 6 books that I really think either will be or should be on the shortlist. I didn't like necessarily all the books that I predicted, or didn't feel super passionate about them, but I felt like they were really deserving of the shortlist. And this year, I don't think I'm gonna have like a video quite like that, or like a prediction quite like that. I have been trying to keep up with some other people's thoughts on some of these books that I haven't yet read without being spoiled too much. I know that one that I was excited for, and I think a few other people were quite excited for, was The Wren by Anne Enright. However, I've seen a lot of criticisms of this book from like this one Goodreads group I'm in, where people just felt like they didn't actually connect with a lot of the characters and they didn't care what was happening. And it's made me a little less excited for it, which is a little unfortunate because it sounds like a very interesting idea, like another sort of mother-daughter relationship with like an iffy, I think, grandfather figure or slash father figure. But I feel like Anne Enright is one of the more well-known authors on this list. Not super well-known to me, but I think well-known to other people in the UK. And so that would have like been a book that despite not having read, I would have thought to like maybe place on the list. But now hearing some of these like criticisms, I'm like, maybe not. So I'm not going to speculate too much about the books that I haven't read yet, because yeah, there's mixed feelings. And I will really just talk about a few books that I think deserve to be on there, but I'm not going to complete like a list of 6 because I don't know this year. Last year, I feel like I had so many more thoughts on this, and both with books I have read and haven't read, whereas this year it's just like there are about 3 books that I really think deserve the shortlist, and other than that, I don't know. One of the first books I read was Hangman by Maya Binyam, and I really, really liked this one. It also had a bit of a weird and slow start for me, but it was quite funny, a bit of like a weird sort of humor, then a little bit of a dark humor. And even though I was certainly confused with this one, and I do not love being like confused right off the bat in a book, I don't know, I feel like I need to get to the answer right away, which maybe isn't like a mature reading thing on my part, but sometimes it can just be like a little bit frustrating to not know what's going on and be like, is this author just kind of like being a little annoying about things? But this one, I didn't mind, like I ended up not minding it as much as we were going along. And this book was just full of a lot of like conversations. The main character is going back to an unnamed African country where he grew up and where he still has some family living. He has been living, I believe, in America for the last couple decades. And he's going back to see his sickly brother, and from the start, like he doesn't fully know his own motivations for being here. And this is in like the first chapter, like his wife packed his bag and got him his ticket, and it just seems a little confusing like why he's doing this. And he's meeting like family members and other people on this trip and having these conversations that a lot of them are very much like criticisms, I think, of sort of the status quo in America, of issues that immigrants have. There's a really interesting part about he meets like a man guarding this pile of clothes, and these are all these like donated clothes from the West that like end up in like landfills or thrift stores that no one wants, and they get shipped to African countries. And this is, I have like read about this, this is a real thing that very much happens, and there are criticisms of that because these clothes end up, I mean, partially just sitting there kind of like a pile of garbage, and also disrupting like local economies because people are getting these like free clothes and not supporting like dressmakers in their own countries. So this is an issue, and like I don't know. So that was kind of the idea of the book, like bringing sort of all these issues through conversation with kind of very interesting and sometimes weird characters. And I appreciate a lot of the conversations. It was definitely like a very thoughtful book, and there's sort of a twist at the end that, looking back, maybe I should have like seen a bit better than I did, but I really enjoyed it. It felt so unique. I really think this book is like shortlist material. I hope to see it on the shortlist. So that was one of them, and that was one of the first I read, and a lot of the others shortly after that just did not enjoy as much. The first one I read was Western Lane by Chetna Maru. I did overall like this one. It was a nice quiet book about grief and kind of throwing yourself into a passion and sort of figuring out a lot of family stuff along the way, and what you really want to be doing. And I did get very emotional towards the end. It was a very emotional book. I would not be upset if I saw this on the shortlist. I don't have super strong feelings towards it, and I know there have been some criticisms about this book being on the Booker Prize shortlist, and some people didn't quite think it was a mature enough kind of book to be on there, didn't really like the writing style or voice that the author was presenting. But I'm a lot more sympathetic to it. I did enjoy it a lot more than I think some of the critics did. But again, it didn't feel necessarily, it didn't grab me wholly. It didn't feel like a super special or memorable book. It's really, I think, my issue with it. It's one of those books that like are good and even moving at times, but will I think of it in a few years? I mean, I read a lot, so it's like, will I think of a lot of the books I read in a few years? But obviously there are books that have stuck with me that I remember having read in like high school, early university, and the last few years that just stay with me because they are memorable. And they're not always like well-written books. I mean, especially some of the stuff I read in high school, it's not always like super literature or whatever, but something about it made like some sort of emotional impact. Whereas that one, as well as a few others on this list, just have not. I did also really like And Then She Fell by Alicia Elliott. I'm glad I bought this one. And honestly, at first it started out and I was like a little iffy on it. I was like, why did I buy this book? Like, I'm probably never going to read it again. But I think I might actually want to read this again. Just this book is about an Indigenous woman who moves to this sort of suburby area of Toronto. She's the only Indigenous person in a fully or mostly white neighborhood with her white husband and their, half white, half Indigenous child. And so she is definitely struggling with microaggressions and outright racism as well, and kind of feels like she's going crazy over it. Her husband is like very supportive in a sense, like he is taking like Mohawk language classes. He is like a researcher of Indigenous studies, and she, like the way they met is because he went to her mom to ask about like some history or something to learn from her, and he fairly compensated her mom. He wasn't like, she was like admiring that because he wasn't like trying to steal the knowledge or whatever. So he seems to be like quite a progressive person. However, he is very much in denial of a lot of these things that she's experiencing when she does talk about some of these microaggressions or acts of racism against her or Indigenous people in general. So you see his sort of blindness to it too, and she starts to feel very alone, and she's also worried that like her Indigenous family and friends now resent her for leaving the res that she grew up on and lived on for most of her life at this point. And so she starts to worry that they're kind of against her as well. I think it's a very like interesting portrayal of paranoia, of postpartum like difficult feelings as well. I don't want to spoil too much, but a lot of these things, like, it makes you question, like, are the things she is thinking and feeling, all this paranoia, is it real or not? And it is written in a way that you truly are not quite sure what kind of book this is. Is this some sort of like magical realism type book, or I don't know, something where there are like supernatural forces or not? And it is very, very interesting. The ending, truly could not have expected like it to go where it did, and I liked that about it. The character felt very real and interesting, and I think just brought up a lot of things that, I mean, as a white person, as a non-Indigenous person, I'm not always aware of, and I think sometimes it's very easy to make excuses, not just race-based ones, but of experiences that are not your own, of being like, oh, well, you know, I don't think that person necessarily meant it that way or whatever. And I've noticed myself doing that before to other people, and like I was reading that, I felt kind of like bad, because like just because I'm not seeing something doesn't mean it's not there. So it's very easy to be blind to experiences that are not your own. I think having that as like a message in this book was very important and interesting. So yeah, I would also love to see what this one on the shortlist. It impressed me a lot, and I genuinely enjoyed this one. Now this one's sort of a cheat because I have not finished this book. I have started Enter Ghost by Isabel Hamad. However, I really am enjoying it so far. I feel like this voice, this sort of character is exactly like who I love to read about a lot. And even though I'm only really like a quarter of the way through it, I feel like I'm gonna really enjoy this book, and I hope that doesn't change. But yeah, I've a good feeling about this one, because the last few books, they like started out kind of meh, and then just kept being kind of meh throughout it. Like, yeah, and then She Fell took me like a few chapters to get into, but not super long either. Like I got into it pretty quickly, whereas the books that I just wasn't into for pretty much the whole of it. So yeah, this one has been really good so far. We follow our narrator Sonia as she returns to, well, what is now Israeli occupied land in Palestine, and she is visiting her sister. She hasn't been back in a long time. They are both Palestinian, but now kind of like living in Israel together. And there's sort of weird disconnect around that, and what her sister is kind of going through working at an Israeli university as a Palestinian, and sort of benefiting from not being in like Gaza or the West Bank, that are obviously under a lot more scrutiny. And I think the narrator Sonia is a little bit apolitical as well. I don't think she thinks about it. However, I think that is going to change later in the book, and I'm very curious for her sort of journey around that. There are obviously a lot of sort of like subconscious issues she has of growing up not really in Palestine, but being Palestinian and having that sort of history of being a part of a very oppressed group of people, and having that oppression continue on. And having witnessed part of the second Intifada, I just really like this author's writing style. I haven't read her other book, but I think I might if I end up like really liking this one. And I just like the character of Sonia as well, who is not the most likable character initially, but there's like something in her that I do like, and that I know I will like even more as like she develops. So I'm excited to finish this one. I hope to finish it before the shortlist is announced. I got distracted reading another book and just kind of put this one aside for a bit, but I will be getting into it again soon. Yeah, I was really glad to see this on the long list. Definitely like a political book. I would like to see it on the shortlist. I'm curious if it will get there, but I don't know, this feels like really good literature to me. This feels like really good writing, a really interesting story so far. I don't think I even described the story too much. Sonia is an actress who will soon be working with a Shakespearean production that is going to be taking place in Palestine, with a lot of Palestinian actors, and I'm sure there will be some like difficulties around that. There's already been talks about like theater groups being sort of targeted or shut down by Israeli occupation forces who don't necessarily approve of like the message. So yeah, I think there's gonna be some struggles later in this book, and I'm very excited to read more about that. So I feel like those are kind of like, they're not even predictions, it's more of a wish list for me. I don't necessarily have like super strong predictions. I think the 3 books that I mentioned are like strong contenders for a shortlist, certainly, but you never know. Books have surprised me, like making it on the shortlist before or not making it on the shortlist. I think I had some of the predictions correct last year, but there were, again, a few that surprised me completely. So I mentioned I also read 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster. I've also read River East, River West, which I liked more than that one. I think it was interesting that they both took place, like they both mentioned like North Korea. They both kind of, there was like a scene around like the Yalu River that sort of separates North Korea and China. So there was sort of like an interesting connection there. And I did enjoy River East, River West a bit more about a young woman kind of coming to age in China with an American mother and not knowing her Chinese father, and kind of side to side with the man who is now her stepfather, but sort of seeing him grow up in China as well, and how he meets her American mother, and the sort of like impact and sort of like a different immigration story of like Americans coming to China, and you do read a lot about like Americans in China. So that was interesting as well. Night Bloom was another one I read, but again, it was just okay. It was a very quick read. It was a very readable book, but didn't necessarily leave like a lasting impact on me. There were some important messages for sure. I think reading about like upper middle class African woman who goes to America and like realizes the extent of racism there that she hadn't really thought, because she led a fairly privileged life back in Ghana. So I think that's also like an important thing to discuss. But the overall story and characters in that book just didn't work for me beyond some of the like political messages that were, I think, interesting and important in that book. And then Soldier Sailor is another one that also like at times had like really beautiful writing, really insightful moments, but yeah, again, not necessarily a memorable one for me. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm a little tired with some books about motherhood. I feel like there's been such a surplus, and I don't know that this one did anything like new or interesting. I was like very excited to read about motherhood for a long time, although usually more by characters who, I don't know, had like an issue with their mother, or like, I don't know. This one was a little bit different, although this was a mother struggling to be a mother with a child who she was having some difficulties with, and a husband who she was having some difficulties with, but ultimately it was fine. It was fine. The writing was really nice. I wouldn't be super surprised if I saw that one on the shortlist, honestly. There were like aspects of it that I think were interesting and important to like bring about like the knowledge of like the issues in motherhood. But again, I don't know that it was like super unique or like said anything that I'm sure quite a few other books have not. So yeah, those are my sort of predictions, kind of a wish list. I really don't have a lot of thoughts on the books that I haven't read yet. I'm sure that there will be a few on the shortlist that I have not read. It would be kind of wild if, I have read almost 8 books, so it's technically possible that all the ones I've read could make it on the shortlist, but I don't think some of the ones I've read necessarily deserve it. But yeah, I can't speak to the ones I haven't read. I am still somewhat excited to read The Wren, and that is one that is waiting for me. I already got it from the library, and it's just waiting until I finish Enter Ghost for me to start reading it. And Brotherless Night, I am looking forward to reading too. Those are the 2 that I'm really thinking about, and the rest we'll just see. I'm sure I'll try to prioritize some of the shortlist books that I haven't already read before other ones, because I really am curious who the winner will be. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you are following this prize, I'm very curious about your thoughts on these books, because the last 3 years that I followed this prize, I feel like I've been way more excited about a lot of the books that I read firsthand. I obviously have not liked everything either, so maybe I just started off like with books that didn't work for me, and maybe a lot of the later ones that I read will be a lot more interesting. But yeah, it is what it is. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Do you have a favorite book? What do you think might make the shortlist? I'm really curious. I'm gonna be watching other people's shortlist predictions. I'm very curious about what other people are thinking might make it. And the shortlist gets announced, I believe, this Wednesday. I'm not even like on top of it, honestly. I think this upcoming Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday. So look out for that. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. If you liked this video, please give it a like. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already, sharing this video with a friend. It would mean so much to me. And once again, thank you for being here, and hopefully I will see you soon.